Hello there, Homeschool Nolan here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. Today I'd like to talk to you about why the Federalist Papers still matter and why I believe every young person learning American history today should study the Federalist Papers. You may remember that the Federalist Papers are a series of 85 essays that were written in 1787 and 88 by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. They were published in New York newspapers back then with the goal of persuading the state of New York to ratify a brand new Constitution of the United States. The Federalist Papers have been regarded as the best interpretation of our Constitution as the Founding Fathers intended and understood it. In fact, the Federalist Papers have been cited over 300 times by the Supreme Court in their rulings over the years. Now, the reason I believe the Federalist Papers matter more than ever today is because they address many of the same important questions we are asking today about our government and our country. And it's through the Federalist Papers that we can gain insight and understanding as to why the framers of the U.S. Constitution drafted it the way they did. What I find remarkable about the Federalist Papers and the Constitution is how, after 234 years, it still addresses many of the great issues and problems in American politics of today. Take factions, for example. We keep hearing how America is more divided than ever. We're divided into two major political parties and many factions within each party. People are wondering, can our republic survive when we are so divided? Well, James Madison addressed this question in Federalist Paper number 10, where he begins by saying, "Among the numerous advantages promised by a well-constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction." In other words, one of the most important purposes of government is to prevent different factions from tearing the country apart. Factions unchecked can tear a country apart. We saw how dangerous factions can be earlier this year on January 6th when an angry faction stormed the U.S. Capitol. Now, many of us may think that the best way to address factions is to govern by democracy where the majority rules. But even this can be dangerous. Madison also wrote this about majority rule. When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passions or interests both the public good and the rights of other citizens. In other words, majority rule is not always the answer. This is because a tyrannical majority can sometimes vote to infringe upon the rights of the minority. Perhaps Madison knew this better than anyone. After all, he ironically was a slave owner and part of a white majority that allowed slavery to continue. In short, factions will always exist wherever you have liberty, but they can also tear a society apart or possibly lead to tyranny. So how to address the problem of factions? James Madison also believed that the solution lied in creating a large and diverse republic with many factions so that no one faction would be able to form a stable majority. In a larger republic where representatives are chosen by the people, Madison believed that it will be more difficult for unworthy candidates to practice with success the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried, and the suffrages of the people, being more free, will be more likely to center in the men who possess the most attractive merit and the most diffusive and established characters. In other words, we the people are to choose among the best of us to be our leaders. Madison and the framers aimed to create a government that represented the will and interests of the people. But at the same time, they recognized the reality of human nature. They knew that men could also sometimes be very corrupt and tyrannical. In Federalist 51, Madison wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary." So how to construct a government that might be led by men who may be the furthest thing from angels? The answer lies in separating the powers of government. And that's why we have three separate branches in our government today: a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch. Each branch is in theory equal to the others and able to serve as a check against the excesses of the others. As Madison put it, in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations are guarded against by a division of the government into distinct and separate departments. Now, because we have this separation of powers, we often end up with what people call divided government or gridlock, where very little gets done. Under divided government, factions often bemoan how difficult it is to get their agenda passed. This is in contrast to what we sometimes see in authoritarian regimes, where a centralized government can get things done more quickly, like building high-speed railroads and even responding to pandemics. Because of this, there are some people who do believe that a more efficient authoritarian model of government is sometimes actually more preferable than the American model. Now, there's one more hot issue of today, addressed in the Federalist Papers, that I'd like to talk about, and that is the Electoral College. If you're someone who questions the fairness of the Electoral College, you may be surprised what Alexander Hamilton wrote about the Electoral College in the beginning of Federalist Paper number 68. Hamilton wrote, "The mode of appointment of the Chief Magistrate of the United States is almost the only part of the system of any consequence which has escaped without severe censure or which has received the slightest mark of approbation from its opponents." Apparently, the Electoral College wasn't controversial at all in 1788. It just shows you how times have changed. Hamilton believed that by having a separate slate of electors in each state vote for president, it would make it harder for any one man to win the presidency through corruption. Hamilton wrote, "The business of corruption, when it is to embrace so considerable a number of men, requires time as well as means. Nor would it be found easy suddenly to embark on them, dispersed as they would be over 13 states." Hamilton also believed that the Electoral College process would afford a moral certainty that the office of the president will never fall to the lot of any man who was not in an eminent degree endowed with requisite qualifications. Talents for low intrigue and the little arts of popularity may alone suffice to elevate a man to the first honors in a single state, but it will require other talents and a different kind of merit to establish him in the esteem and confidence of the whole Union. Now, we can debate whether men of such low intrigue have ever been elected president, and I believe the fairness of the Electoral College will continue to be debated in this country. But regardless of how you stand, I think you will find Alexander Hamilton's essays on both the presidency and the Electoral College in the Federalist Papers a very interesting read. So in summary, I believe the Federalist Papers matter more than ever today. They matter because they explain how and why the U.S. Constitution was created to address many of the great issues of 1787 as well as today. If you're interested in politics, read the Federalist Papers. If you're a history teacher or homeschooling parent, assign your teenage students to read the Federalist Papers. Our children are growing up in a world that seems more fractious and divided than ever. And unfortunately, most of today's political debates seem to just center around short tweets and brief and shallow comments on social media. Reading the Federalist Papers, however, will return you to a time when political debates were more well-reasoned, thoughtful, and contemplative. And by studying these essays of the past, we can perhaps better contemplate how we want to shape our society of the future. And I hope this has been helpful to you today as you help you and your children navigate through these divided times. If so, please click subscribe and leave a comment below. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.